This episode was sponsored by the Geopolitical Insight and Education Foundation. Want to find out more? Check the link in our show notes.
Welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So, guys, you do recognize my voice. It's always Rosie here. And as I've said far too many times at this point, this is just with students and young professionals who are very interested in anything that has to do with technology. And yes, it's regulation. And today we drive far, far, far away from, well, any country in Europe, America, and even the Earth to actually explore a very exciting new topic. This episode is brought in collaboration with the GIE Foundation. We've been talking about them a lot, and they're also the logo on our podcast, kind of credits and everything you see around. So yeah, check these guys out. Now, we are here joined, I say we, but actually I'm alone because Jack has abandoned me, by the way. But I am here with three guests, three amazing people, of which one you know already. It's Ben and Yorio. Ben, I found out. Great to see you, Ben.
Hello. Great to see you too.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And I'm also joined by Maia Sacchetto. Hi, Maia. Great to see you.
Hello. Hello. Glad to be here with you all. It's going to be a very productive session, I guess.
Oh, very productive. And as I said, we're going to try to travel really, really far. So, brace yourself. And then we are here also with Davide Iannace. Hi, Davide. Great to see you.
Hi, Yoli. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great for you three to be here because you're here to talk about a very important contribution that's been published on the GIE Foundation website, and we will dive into that a bit better. But firstly, I'm going to ask you to present yourself, to kind of introduce your personality, your career to our guests. And I'm going to start with the ladies. So Maia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rosalia. Very briefly on myself. I'm Maia Sacchetto. I come from Reggio Calabria, but I've been living in Rome for 10 years now. Mine is an international background and then specializing in policy analysis for the European Commission, especially. But my background also goes further to other other topics over than what concerns especially the European Commission and European institutions. And I'm very passionate about geopolitics.
That's absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to dive into this topic. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm spiking expectations, but Davide, it's your turn. What have you been up to?
Hi, so as Maya, I come from the south of Italy. I'm from Benevento, and as her, I live in Rome for 10 years. I have a PhD in economic statistics, and I'm specialized in policy evaluation, mostly always for European Commission and national authorities. And my main research topics are always linked to, well, advanced stuffs. I usually love to research technically, research developments, defense, and especially also rural areas. So a bit of a spectrum of things that I like to do.
That's absolutely amazing. And Ben, you're not from Southern Italy, I'm told.
Well, my grandfather is, and now I live in central Italy. So we're all from a relatively small area of the world in a certain sense. But hello, everybody. You know me. I'm the president of the GIE Foundation, and I am so excited today to be joined by two of our wonderful, brilliant genius researchers, Davide and Maia. And the main thing that I want to introduce and announce today is the start of our European Resilience program. Rosie, you've been interviewing some of the folks from our wider Drivers of Instability program, where we take hard-hitting and important geopolitical governance topics that relate to stability in our democratic societies and do excellent research on them, and then build policy recommendations and then go advocate and lobby for them. What we realized we have an opportunity to do is create a specialized European governance program called European Resilience, led by the wonderful Davide, with core contributions from Maia, as well as Sara Pane and Christina Bilimenko, and look at a whole bunch of different aspects of European governance, and it includes defense integration, cloud governance, data governance, and of course, today, space governance, which I will let the expert researchers in the room talk about instead of me.
That's brilliant. I love how you started European resilience from the furthest place possible, which is a good way to start. I mean, considering where the Commission usually starts from, I think makes sense. So let's read the title of the article, which I think everyone will enjoy reading in general. It's called Orbit Without Order, The Costs of Fragmented Space Governance, which is a great title. I love the alliteration there. But also, um, space governance. Space governance is something that I would say doesn't always feature in the headlines. The space, as I said, sounds very far away from us. Every time we talk about the space, is also in connection with, the moon landing and something very cool that unites the nation. And yet we're talking about the fragmented space, which I think is a very interesting approach to the understanding of why the space is so important. It has been in the news a bit more. Someone called Elon Musk, I'm told that there will be some talk about him, has been thinking of placing data centers on the space. So very interesting what's going on out there. But before we start talking about really the topic of the article, I'm just going to ask quickly, Ben, in terms of the GIE Foundation, why did you take this topic at heart? We've talked about the new initiative, but why did you start talking about space?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I agree that on the face of it, it might not seem immediately obvious. But actually, space governance, while it sounds technical and may be in a policy sense technical, it really isn't. It's highly universal. It's a question, really, ultimately, about who controls the infrastructure of democratic life. So that's navigation, it's communications, it's emergency services, and of course, military operations, as we've seen. And so the question is whether democratic institutions have any meaningful say in that. And one of the things that we are, I'm sure, going to explore a little bit later on is that with the hegemonic retreat of the nation state from space governance, ceding that territory to major companies, SpaceX most notably, with a preponderance of all space launches for the last few years, there's a really meaningful democratic question here. And so why are we looking at it in the European Resilience Program? There's an immediate question about European democratic capacity if all of the space launch capacity, space governance capacity that governs so many aspects of European daily life that we've mentioned, from communications to emergency services, is not held by European companies or European state organizations. And so we decided to look at it because it really is a fundamental point to understand how is Europe going to compete and safeguard its democratic institutions if it doesn't have the levers to pull in terms of how it governs some of the most important infrastructure in society?
Europe does not have the levers. Never heard of this one before, But I'm going to start asking a question to Maia, because I know that we have something in common in the sense that we do care about the legal space and the legal rules of space in this case. Pun intended. So I studied international law. A lot of our listeners know that because I do talk about it a lot on the podcast. And the first rule that I learned is that there are two things that are not owned by anybody aside from the seaside, but that depends as well. They are the Antarctic continent, which I don't have any intention of visiting, and the space. Famously, the space. It was one of the classes. It was also a very warm day on the date, so I do remember it very, very kind of brightly. Now, this is not true. That it's not. It's the general principle, yes, but then there are a lot of caveats and actually exceptions and specifications. So I'm going to ask you to start kind of guiding us into the legality of the space.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Rosalia, for introducing this big part of the space economy. I'm trying to be brief because there's very much to say about the legal framework on the space economy, but we have to take in mind that this journey begins in the shadow of the Cold War, because in the 1960s, the US and the Soviet Union realized that an orbital nuclear arms race would have destabilized the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. And to prevent this, they turned to the United Nations and produced what are known as the Big Five treaties. First one, which is probably the most common, is the Outer Space Treaty that was signed in 1967. And we can call it, we can deem it as the constitution of the space indeed, because it established that the space is the province of all the mankind. And no spoiler, but I can confirm what you already said, Rosalia. It is not like that, because we're going to see, and we're going to develop then with Davide, what is space economy today. But it was conceived to be the province of all mankind, or in Latin, provincia humani generis, meaning that it must be used for the benefit of all countries. Crucially, Article 2 prohibits any nation from claiming sovereignty over space or celestial bodies like the moon. Then we have a second treaty, which is more specific about that, which is the humanitarian and technical pillars. So following the OST, 3 more agreements were reached. The 1968 actually rescue agreement, helping astronauts in distress, the 1972 liability convention, making states pay for damage caused by their space objects, and then the 1975 registration convention, which requires states to list what they launch to ensure transparency. I think it's worth to mention also the 1979 turning point of the Great Deadlock, because the era of universal lawmaking hit a wall in 1979 with the so-called Moon Agreement. The Moon Agreement was an attempt to declare lunar resources the common heritage of mankind, and also suggested actually an international regime to manage commercial mining. Major powers like the US, the Soviet Union, China refused to sign, fearing indeed that it would, hinder any attempt of private investment. And this is what I guess marked the end of hard international lawmaking on the space economy. And since then, I would say that the UN has been in a legislative deadlock, producing only soft law and non-binding guidelines, or for things like space debris and sustainability that lack any real enforcement or penalties. And we will go further also on this matter of the oversight, specifically later on in our podcast. But what I wanted also to highlight here is this specific passage from 2020 and 2026 from a governance law framework still governed by the states to the so-called minilateralism. So as the UN system is stalled, nowadays we have moved into the era of minilateralism, where countries form, let's say, smaller exclusive clubs that actually are setting their own rules. And I'd say the pivotal example of this are the Artemis Accords, which have been and are still led by the US and NASA. And this coalition grew from 8 members in 2020 to 67 nations by May 2026. And so what are the Artemis Accords? They aren't real treaties. They are rather bilateral political commitments designed to bypass the slow UN legal process. What do countries that sign the Artemis Accords have as reward to have signed the Artemis Accords? They have access to the NASA procurement contracts. So the Accords are controversial, I would say, because they reinterpret the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, and they argue that extracting resources like water, ice, or minerals does not count actually as national appropriation. This provides a US-based legal guarantee for private companies to own, trade, sell what they mine in space. Another important concept that I want to highlight here is the concept of safety zones, which is included in Article 11 of the Artemis Accords, which states that safety zones are this area that would prevent interface between different operators. Critics warned that this could lead to creeping sovereignty, where a country effectively controls a resource-rich area under the guise of safety. But what we know is that you cannot declare a zone as safe if you don't have actually an infrastructure to extract resources in that specific zone. So I will try to wrap up now. So what we have now is a really fragmented legal framework, and what we are really worried about, and what we also argue in our publication, is that by 2026, this club-based governance has triggered a defensive reaction. China and Russia have responded with their own rival bloc, which is the International Lunar Research Station. So now we have two competing ecosystems with incompatible legal standards and visions, and one global law for space. We have property rights and technical standards being used as instruments of bloc competition, so leaving the global commons of the 1960s behind for a more divided and commercial frontier.
Wow, it's really the history of space, wow. But I don't know, to me it seems like, the clue was in the name. Calling something a province, I mean, by legal standards and Roman law standards, the little I remember, is exactly like you have the expectation of extracting something from it, because that's what provinces are. We're not calling it a free land of everyone. We're calling it a province. So maybe even those initial accords, this initial idea of a commune, still had this kind of extractionary kind of approach, view, a nuance that we should have imagined that someone was going to exploit it. And talking about exploitation, we're talking about huge economies and economic gains. And in that, I'm going to literally shave it off to Davide, because I need you to maybe let us our listeners understand a bit more. What do we mean when we talk about the economics of space?
Well, first of all, it's always bad to talk after Maya because she is so much more precise than me, and so I will try my best. But what you're talking right now of space economy is more than 600 billions of dollars of infrastructure and services provided through space systems. And we are talking about something that will grow to $1.8 trillion by 2035. So we're talking about a huge chunk of economy that's orbit around our heads, and which is currently shifting from the old paradigm where public infrastructure, well, let's say, one of the backbone, to a new system in which a new reality in which private companies can transport more easier than public actors object into the lower Earth orbit. And of course, I'm referring to the biggest case in the market, which is SpaceX. We are living now in an era in which we rely for most of our services from satellites. So we depend, as Ben said previously, of our mapping. We are depending for information transmissions, and most critically, we depend for defense, which is one of the topics that I said is of my interest, and which is why I started looking into space. I think there is an emblematic case. It's about the war in Ukraine, and it's about the use of Starlink in the battlefield. So when Ukraine started using Starlink, they had a huge competitive advantage toward Russians. They could rely on a very solid infrastructure, which is privately held, and at the same time, this infrastructure was partially used by the Russians. And recently, Russians were cut out of the Starlink transmission, and they practically lost an eye on the battlefield. So, and of course, for someone, this is great, but of course, open an interrogative. And we are devoting resources, legal resources, but also economic resources to help companies go into space and mount infrastructure on which we then rely for defense without having a complete oversight of what is happening in the space. As Maya also cited, there is now a more recurrent interest toward the resources extraction. So we know that we need materials for a lot of activities that we conduct on Earth. I talk about what the European Union defined as critical raw materials, no? Among which lithium and cobalt, they are the backbone of the digital and modern economy. So they're used to make chips, they're used to make computers, they support the AI industry as a whole. And of course, extracting them on Earth is difficult and of course create competitiveness among countries. And we all know that, for example, China has a huge competitive advantage on critical raw materials. And so there is an interest on saying, okay, if I can't mine them on Earth, maybe I can start looking out of Earth and going into space to extract these resources. And since now it's becoming more and more easier to take things to space, it's also becoming easier to take things back from space itself. And so this will open a new chapter, which is not exactly targeted in this paper, but will be in the future, about what it means for the economy to start saying, okay, I will not just use the orbit to transmit information. I will not just use as backbone of what's happening on Earth, but I will transform space in a different complete segment of Earth economy itself. This also concerns Luna, our moon, and it's something that also Maia said. So there are treaties that say moon should not be used for several things. But of course, now there is a new interest in say, but it's also the closest things we have. That's also a mineral and geology deposit. So there is a strong interest on that. But I would say that it's indicative of how easy space has become recently, since we went from spending at least, I will remember the number, 54,000 euro per kilogram to take anything to Earth from Earth on space, on satellite, whatever, to $3,000. So it's almost tenfold less. It means that it's becoming easier. We are having also space tourism. It's something that people start talking. It's for rich people, of course, now, but it's something indicative of how easier it's becoming to go to space. And these open challenges because it's a huge part of the economy, which can be divided bluntly into parts. We have backbones, satellites, and we have the reach, transmission information. And both elements are currently not well scrutinized, and I will say that the governance of this is not well developed. So we're talking about a very huge piece of economy that it's becoming more and more relevant. And for example, you cited something before, is this idea of data hub in space. It's not something I believe will happen in the short terms because there are too many challenges, and also it's to me, but of course it's my personal opinion, so maybe I will be wrong in 5 years. It appears a costly endeavor to put something that you can continue to use on Earth. But I really believe that we're going toward an era in which we will go to space to mining operation, and also in the future also to easy the transport of resources from one side of Earth to the others. And information transmission will always rely on Earth orbit, whether it's low Earth satellite as Starlink or geostationary satellites, which are more advanced but also more costly. That is something that we should keep an eye on for sure.
That's brilliant. Thank you, David. You were also very precise. Don't worry. Just saying. Said that I don't have any aspiration of becoming Katy Perry in this conversation, but no. You talked about some countries. Both of you, actually, Maya and Davide, you did name the US several times. Now we know that Elon Musk technically is South African. Just saying, he's an immigrant as well. But he's American, so let's take him for an American. We talked about Russia. There was some mentioning of Russia, especially in the war with Ukraine, and there was a lot of mentioning of China. I didn't hear Europe, but your program is about European resilience. So maybe I'm going to ask Davide to start first, and then Maya, you can obviously comment on that. Are we too late, or has Europe maybe got a saying, considering that the Artemis Accords that Maya mentioned seem to be bilaterals with the US law and ruling, and I mean ruling behind it. Davide, you have word.
Well, first of all, I will make as premise that I'm extremely optimistic, so I will always say that things can get better. We talked about mostly Russia and the US because, of course, historically the Cold War and space was an argument of Cold War. It was between them. And China, of course, it's a major player now. It's a country that is devoting a lot of resources to expand its reach beyond the Earth orbit and in Earth itself, especially on critical raw materials and other kind of supply chain as that. But we don't have to forget that, for example, Italy was one of the first countries to put a satellite in orbit. So historically speaking, European Union and European countries had a role in space, and we have the European Space Agency, which is of course a legendary, let's say it's equal to NASA in terms of reputation, which is interesting. It's not an European Union agency. The European Space Agency, it's out of the European Union, which instead has the European Union Space Program Agency, which is something different. And on this we will get back. So I will say that we are not late, but we are slow to react to a world changing because we are looking to investment being made in of course reaching the space more easier, and SpaceX enjoy this collaboration with NASA that helped them to develop new systems which allow to reduce the cost to go in the orbit, and the European Union is investing in this too. They're investing in low launchers. They're investing in increase their reach to go into space. We also have, of course, we have the French Guiana, where we have one of the few places where you can launch heavy rockets into orbit, and we have in Finland places where which you can launch a light object into orbit. But as usual, I think that we are going toward that direction in a slow manner. So there is a lot to do, and that's of course the final recommendation that I don't know if you want to present now, but it's about exactly improving mostly the governance of how the European Union is managing space. First of all, we need to better assess what are the limits of the current space architecture. So we have to understand what are the criticicities, the critical points, I will say something different. Which is something that we did, for example, with critical raw materials. So we had a pure, long, dramatic assessment of how much dependent we are on other countries on this pivotal sector of economy, and we have to do something for space too. So we have to understand what are the weak points of this value chain, what are the weak points of the supply chain, why we are limited in some manners, are we investing enough, are we not investing enough? There are critical points in the governance, for example, of the current bodies. Of course, we have to understand better how to improve these tools, and it means creating a new governance for space practically in the Union. We have to create some legal tools that should support the European Union. Of course, Maya jump on the legal aspects because they are my weak points, but we have to create legal tools that should ensure that the European Union is equipped to react faster, because it's all a matter of velocity in this sense. So other countries are rushing because they see the opportunity and they understand that it's the kind of things that can get crowded, because this is an aspect that we didn't say now, but spaces became crowded. So it's a bit of a oxymoron to say, hey, space is unlimited, yeah, but the orbit is not. So we have more now. There are at least 10,000 satellites by Starlink only in the lower orbit. And there are debris, and there are other satellites, and then there are satellites in the medium and in the high orbits. There is the International Space Station. So it's getting crowded up there. It means that it will become more difficult to reach the space. It became also more dangerous to go there. And we don't have even a governance to exactly manage this process of getting so many things out there and then manage what remains. And then there is, of course, a democratic aspect that it's, of course, one of the reasons why we're investigating space. That is, all of this is beautiful. We need better governance, but we need better public scrutiny of what is happening in the orbit. So we need a better oversight. We need a better political control. We can't let only private sector and few restricted group to decide how the space infrastructure evolve. We can't, simply because we depend on it. We depend on it to have this conversation. We depend on it for social media, and we know how much impact they have on common life, on political life. We can't just leave the possibility to govern this infrastructure to someone else. There is something that really gives the grasp of this, because, for example, Italy, that was trying to extend the internet access to all the territories, including the one outside of the big cities, would like to rely on Starlink to connect to rural areas. And so this is gives something. It say that there is a public actor that say, okay, I need to make people connected. How I do so? I invest in the private. I give resources to a private actor, to an infrastructure that is held by private actors, and I completely abandon the idea of developing my systems and try to being at least competitive in this sector. I'm not a fan of saying, oh no, the state must control everything and so on, but we have to build an alternative. So good to know that there is private infrastructure in space. Better to know that there is also a public alternative on which you can rely and which you know has a public oversight. And then, of course, there is these things that is very typical of the European Union that we have the European Space Agency and we have the European Union Space Program. And so here is the question why we have two overlapping institutions, which of course I understand that the ESA depends on a different body, but at the same time, ESA depends on European funds to function. So it's the European Union giving money to the ESA and European Union member states giving money to the ESA and then spending money on the European Union space program. So it's time, I think, to renew the marriage and understand how to better link these organizations to improve probably the European Union space program and probably for it to become part of ESA as active actors, or maybe make the contrary. This is a political choice, of course, but I think it's time for the Union to have its own tool, something that it is controlled through a democratic process, through the democratic institution of the European Union, and that can be used as also as a tool, the European Union, to counter the United States, China, in the space economy. So I think there are a lot of things that can be done, which until now are a bit going slow. But I still think that we are not too late. On a positive note, I think there is the opportunity to also because space it's really not the final frontier, but it's the next frontier, and it's open to technology innovation. We have a lot of Horizon programs devoted to improve how we go to space, but also we have advanced program like IRIS, which show that when European institutions and European countries want to go in that direction, they can do that, and they can do that in a very qualitative manner. So I don't know, Maya, if you want to add something, but I will say that we are not late. It's just that we need to start running and not slowly walking.
I don't. Oh, sorry, Rosalia, but I don't
Go.
could give any added value of on what Davide just already said. He covered a lot of aspects and very deeply. So maybe I would conclude just saying that the European Union nowadays is a norm taker in this landscape, and as the legal framework is that fragmented, it has still the opportunity to become the norm shaper, let's say, through strategic investments and institutional reforms. We talk about the European Union Space Program Agency and the enlargement of its mandate to turn it into a powerhouse, let's say, capable of defining priorities and attractive also private investment, moving away from the fragmented intergovernmental structures. And then we also propose to map all the European public services relying on non-EU space infrastructure, develop a formal position on celestial resources, than just, let's say, inheriting standards set by the US or other blocs. And then I think most important, parliamentary scrutiny for space procurement activities and contracts that could create long-term dependencies on non-domestic actors. So an increased oversight is nowadays more than needed.
Thank you, Maya. And yes, I wanted to ask you exactly what kind of like legal views you had on what Davide introduced and talked about very in depth. So perfect. That was my question anyways. I'm gonna kind of circle back to the concept of democracy. And in this, I'm gonna call Ben in the conversation because I would like to know his perspective as well. I really love the point on having a need for kind of democratic oversight when we talk about the parliament having oversight. The parliament is elected by people, of course, even in the European Union. So in case, for our international listeners, the parliament is elected by the people of the EU. But I have a doubt on that in terms of democratically, how much do you think? And I understand the point of it's a huge space of resources and we should care about it, but like realistically, how far can we ask people to care about something like space? Because I think from the point of view of democratic scrutiny, firstly, I would highly doubt that there are people in the parliament that have this kind of ability to scrutinize what's happening in the space. So I think that's also an issue of like, who are we electing? The three of us come from Italy. And then I'm going to stop talking because, but I would like to bring this back to Ben from a democratic perspective. Do people really care enough for becoming the protectors of the space and the orbit? Or is it something practical that is only going to be discussed in academia?
No, so I think that, in fact, we have to take a very hard stance here and say rather brutally that it doesn't matter what people want to care about. It matters what has impact. And you could make the exact same argument for climate science. How many of our parliamentarians across Europe or in the United States or in our national legislatures are climate scientists? Very few. You can make the same argument about data centers. In fact, about all AI. There's no doubt we need to regulate AI. Space governance is just as important. Davide and Maia have both explained in significant detail a number of the ramifications if we get it wrong. And also explained, I think, in fair detail how democratic oversight processes don't need to understand every technical aspect. That's what experts are for. That is actually what lobbying is supposed to do. A representative, any representative, is not supposed to be an expert in simultaneously agriculture and energy and public infrastructure and water sanitation. But they do need to make decisions on those things. How do they do that? They get expert advice, and those people who wait in the lobby and then speak to a member about an issue give that expert advice, and then the informed member takes that and makes a better decision. And that's exactly, of course, what a think tank does. A think tank is trying to provide that expert advice from an independent perspective and help the democratic process to make the right decisions. So do we need to care about space? Yes, definitely. I think that's absolutely clear for all of the reasons that have already been mentioned, from security and defense to energy to communications to the potential vast resources to be found. Do we all in each jurisdiction need to care about space? Yes, again, absolutely. Even if it seems esoteric, it will impact Europe. Even if it seems far away, it's going to impact India and Africa, South America. So the only real question is how to make sure that we do it right. It's not a question from a democratic standpoint of whether we should or shouldn't.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. Amazing answer as always. And Davide, I'm gonna ask you. You list a number of potential solutions, which were very interesting to hear, and our listeners can also find in the article, which, as I said, will be in the link to our show notes. So find it there. But my question is, you said we're not too late in the EU. To what extent do you think that the current EU, I'm not going to call it administration, but leading ruling body, is safeguarding space in a way? And the second, a bit more difficult question maybe to answer. We have, like, from the regulatory perspective, our listeners know that we really do talk a lot about AI, about digital services, digital markets. And we have been seeing the European Commission, the European Union, as trying to kind of, let's say, negotiate the rights of European citizens and individuals with the need to have a decent relationship with the United States. And I'm going to ask you, to what extent are your solutions, in light with the current, at least, leitmotif of the realpolitik of the European Union?
Okay, it's quite difficult, but let's see if I can find a good answer. So we start from the second one, which is directly connected to the first. Of course, it means starting to have a more aggressive stance on space, and not aggressive in the sense, oh, we will wage war for space. It means that you have start to have and to stand and have a point. So it means that you should think about the future and you should say, okay, perfect. We know that the space economy is growing. We know that in 10 years it will be 1.8 trillion euro. We know that we depend on space. We know that even new technologies that we are developing will start depending more on space. And so it means making up political decisions. And I must say, sometimes I'm a bit skeptic about the current leadership of the European Union in taking this sort of hard decisions. But it will put a collision route between China, US, and the European Union, of course. Yes, this will probably happen. There will be a lot of political discussion between them. But at the same time, is sometimes discussing is the only way to try to reach a more favorable agreement. Right now, if we continue with this strategy of the debt possum, you will just see the space leaping in the hands of other competitive actors. And sometimes it's even more troubling that these competitive actors will be private companies. So not even national bodies, it will be literally space companies that they will start do whatever they want because there are no regulation on what to do there for them. So I would say that there is a need for Ben said that correctly. There is a bit of lobbying to do. There is a bit of pushing forward the agenda to say, look, you are overlooking something very serious, and it's space. Because we really depends on it, and we will depend more and more in the coming year. And I think the European Union, uh, I was, I look toward defense, for example, and critical raw materials as topics because they're interlinked with space. When they start to sense the urgency, they also start to act slowly. And there is the issue, of course, of taking an agreement of 27 member states. But why on space I'm a bit more positive? Because differently from defense, for example, which of course is strictly linked to the foreign policy and so is strictly linked to the powers of countries, European countries has devoted space to the European agency. And while we, of course, have the Agenzia Spaziale Italiana, so we have our own agency and space as its own, they worked so much together in the last 5 decades, probably, that the boundaries between them are very lower. So I think that it's different from other critical aspects of the of policies like defense because we have a long history of cooperation. We have done a lot of things together in space, even at international level, like the International Space Station. So there are the fundamentals to say we can continue cooperating. So I would say that if the European Union start saying, okay, let's sit together, let's find agreements between us, and let's start doing something to regulate space, but also to go in space in a better way, so to invest resources and to, for example, facilitate European companies, exactly like NASA said and did for SpaceX, we should do the same for our own companies. Um, I think that on that it will be possible to find an agreement. It's a less sensitive topics on certain aspects, exactly also for what you said. Sometimes people don't see the urgency of space. So they say, yeah, it exists, but I don't see why we should take care of that now. And sometimes when this happens, it's, less conflicts in the political side means easier to get an agreement on something. Well, for example, again, defense is a hot topic. It's everyone has an opinion on that. Everyone talks about that. It's more difficult sometimes to reach an agreement. Space can be easier in some instances, and I'm optimist because we have this long history of cooperation through the European Space Agency. We have the European Union Space Program. So we have some experiences that say that it's possible to reach an agreement. How much the leadership will do that, it will depend on how much lobbying we will do for that, and also on what happens on the outside, because the more companies in China and the US will go to space, the more they will start adding elements of, I would say, of urgency. And so, in a certain sense, they will probably, in 5 or 6 years, we will see a new rush for space and probably a new, let's say, a new sense of how urgent it is. And this probably help in convincing everyone to start moving also a bit in advance.
Thank you, Davide. Maya, there's a question that's pressing, I know, in the hearts of our listeners as well, but definitely in mine. Can we own property on space? Is that the legal solution that we're going to find?
Yeah, we can. Yes, of course. Of course. There's a legal, I said, so the conclusion of all this is that the legal framework is fragmented. We have no very strict legal stances. Yes, legal stances regulating space. But I would just integrate what Davide just said, which is what we lack in terms of the European Union side is a unified stance. And what is worth mentioning here is that many member states of the European Union singularly signed the Artemis Accords. Other did not. So I think the legal space of maneuver exists. What the European Union first needs to do is to have a coherent voice when dealing with a US-led initiative. So let's just try to skip this bilateral versus multilateral dichotomy. If many EU member states have individually signed the Artemis Accords through bilateral agreements with NASA, okay, if Germany is developing in parallel its own space program, what can we do? Like, we cannot do like an unequivocal norm shaper as we were talking about earlier. So first thing first to reach is the lack of unified stance. Then, of course, the European Union, yes, it can own properties in the space.
I was asking for a friend because considering the prices of housing here in Munich, one may actually think, in the bottom of the moon, literally. Thanks for clarifying that. And I love the call to, starting small, do not sign, do rethink of signing bilateral agreements with American agencies because, that's let's move together in a more European approach, which, by the way, would also be in line with what the funding treaties of the European Union say. So maybe we should kind of like all work in that direction. Okay, I'm gonna close the podcast here, but I would like for you three to maybe give me one conclusive remark so that we wrap it up in the minds of our consumers, of our listeners, of our consumers. Never mind. But Ben, I'm going to start with you this time because you've been the last one to speak last time.
Yeah. So look, I think that the big thing, I want to take it back to the macroscopic here. The name of the organization is the Geopolitical Insight and Education Foundation. So let's talk about geopolitics. Why are we focusing on this? It's because we want vibrant democracy. We're concerned about democratic stability. And so we're pro-American, we're pro-European, we're pro-democracy everywhere, we're pro-global democracy. What we need for that is not monopoly and not a forceful regime coming from any part of the globe, governing space, governing data, whatever it is. We need something multivariate. We need vibrancy. So the reason we're focused on this in this commentary and in this program, this project, is to try to increase resilience in European democracy. Europe is exposed on this in a way that most people don't fully understand. When a European government or a company depends on Starlink or an American constellation for secure communications, for example, that's not just a commercial arrangement. It's a strategic dependency on an actor whose accountability runs to a different democratic system. And it's pretty easy to envision a future where it depends on an actor whose accountability runs to a non-democratic system, let's say Chinese technology. So all of this is to say that we want to support a vibrant, healthy European governance around space and also around data centers and AI, which is going to be coming up in the European Resilience series, another entry soon. The window to shape all of these emerging rules and all of these emerging spaces, rather than just inherit them, is closing. And so we need to act now.
And Davide, I'm going to go to you next because we go in reverse order.
And I was in the middle, so it's perfect. I don't change my position. I will just build on what Ben said. We are not still in the most critical position. There is still time for doing better space policy, to invest in the infrastructure. We have now satellites in orbit. We have our own infrastructure, which is little but is present. And I think that it's something that we can build upon. It will be a good field for showing European cooperation. It can be a good field to show even something more, like cooperating also with non-European countries through the European Union. So I see space as an opportunity. I think it can be a good opportunity to build a better governance, to show it's possible to build better governance in an area in which new fantastic technologies are appearing, from artificial intelligence to quantum technologies. And all of this will require, a new type of approach, one in which the policy, in the political sides, decides to put some boundaries and leave people free to act and explore. And this is most exciting about our time for sure. And I would say that space is a good example of that. So we have to keep an eye on that and also to see to several opportunities that it present, like space extraction, space explorations. There are many things to do out of Earth. And I just hope that maybe with a bit of better governance, it will be easier to start to go in that direction in the future.
We want a Brussels effect on the outer space. Let's go for it. And Maia, your last thought.
Yes, I would just thought that for democratic blocs like the European Union, the reliance on non-democratic actors for space access creates a real systemic vulnerability. So when the real infrastructure for essential services, such as the EU digital wallet or emergency communications, military communications, we also talked about how telecommunications, how the space can influence also what's happening militarily on the Earth. So when everything just sits in non-EU hands, it's no longer just a commercial arrangement, but a threat to the strategic autonomy of the European Union and all the governments in general, because they found themselves unable to regulate what occurs in the orbit, because they lack both legislative framework and independent infrastructure to enforce their own values. So we came with this proposed democratic solution to protect democracy, actually, to protect democratic processes and transparency, including parliamentary scrutiny and oversight. But this is still a long way on. And just to say that the space economy, even it's that far away, it's not exempt from this democratic oversight processes.
Thank you. So, let's wrap it up like this. Space deserves a space in our democracy in Europe. So thank you so much. And I'm going to go again in the same order as the beginning. Maia Sacchetto, Davide Iannace, and Ben Iorio. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And, to all of our listeners, read the article and wait for the next episodes with the GIE Foundation, because there will be many more upcoming. This was all from the Legal for Tech, the podcast.
This episode was brought to you in partnership with DG Beetle. DG Beetle helps privacy professionals to stay up to date with the most important European documents in the AI, data and digital space every day. Curious to know more? Check out the link in our show notes.